Have you ever seen something that you weren't supposed to? Something your mind tries to forget, but your body never does. Tonight, on Scary Stories Alive, I'll be sharing 5 true encounters. Stories told by the people who lived through them, or at least say they did. We'll visit a lake where something waits just beneath the surface. A backyard dish tuned to something inhuman. A motel room that doesn't stay empty. A child who talks to someone on a broken TV. And a tunnel that leads nowhere you should ever go. Turn off the lights, put in your headphones, and remember, if something knocks twice, don't open the door. I used to babysit this kid named Owen every Thursday night while his parents went to some couples counseling thing. He was 7, quiet, polite, a little too mature for his age. I liked him, honestly, but he had this thing he always did that made me feel weird. Every time I came over, right when his parents left, he'd go into the living room and turn on the old box TV they kept on the floor. It wasn't hooked up to cable or anything, just static, and he'd sit in front of it, silent, like he was watching something. I asked him once what he was doing, and he said, "Waiting for her to come back." I assumed it was just some imaginary friend thing. Kids are weird like that. I'd usually distract him with snacks or board games after a while, and he'd forget about it. One night, during a thunderstorm, the power flickered a few times. I was in the kitchen making popcorn when Owen called out, "She's back!" When I walked in, the TV was off, completely black, but he was staring at it, wide-eyed, like it was still on. His hands were shaking. I asked him what he meant, and he pointed to the screen and said, "She was smiling this time." I turned the TV around, thinking maybe someone had connected a USB or something weird like that. But there was nothing, just the power cord. No antenna, no Wi-Fi stick, nothing. After his parents came home, I told his mom about it. She got really quiet and just said, "He used to say the same thing after his sister died." That was the first I'd ever heard about a sister. I never babysat again after that night. A few weeks later, I drove past their house and saw the curtains drawn tight, even during the day. A realtor sign was in the yard. I heard through a friend that Owen had been moved to stay with relatives. No one would say why.
There was this property on the outskirts of town that my brother and I used to drive past every day on the way to school. The house was normal looking enough. White siding, green shutters, 2 stories, but the backyard had this huge satellite dish just sticking out of the ground. Not a modern one either. It was like the kind used in the 80s, massive, rusting, and aimed right at the sky. I never saw anyone in the yard, never saw the dish move. When I was 16 and just got my license, I'd sometimes drive around at night with friends, and eventually I brought them past the house. One of them, Jason, dared us to go in and take a picture next to the satellite. I didn't want to, but he kept egging me on. So we parked a few houses down and walked around to the backyard. The whole yard had a weird slope to it, like it was sinking. The dish loomed over us, easily 15 feet tall. It had a thick cable running from the back, underground, into the house. Jason was laughing and trying to climb it, but I felt sick just looking at it, like it wasn't supposed to be there. I told him I was heading back to the car. He yelled something after me, but I didn't turn around. He didn't come back for 10 minutes. I was about to get out and look for him when I saw him walking back up the street. He was pale, like he'd just seen something awful, but wouldn't tell me what. I asked what happened, and he just said, "Don't go near that thing again, please." 2 days later, he showed up at my house at 3 a.m., knocking on my window. He said someone had been calling his landline and just breathing into the phone. The caller ID showed the number as his own. That night was the last time I saw him in person. His family moved 2 weeks later, completely unannounced. Their house went up for sale within a month. I drove by the dish house a few days ago out of curiosity. The house looked exactly the same, but the dish is gone. It was early October, and my friend Caleb and I were trying to find a place to fish before the weather turned too cold. There was a small, man-made lake about 30 minutes outside of town that we hadn't tried yet. A guy at the bait shop told us it was stocked but barely ever used anymore, and that some parts of it had overgrown. That only made it more appealing to us. So that Saturday, we packed up our gear and got there around 5 p.m. We parked on a short dirt trail that led into the woods. After about a 10-minute walk, the trees thinned out and we could see the water. It was still and glassy, surrounded by cattails and tall grass. We couldn't see any docks or boats, just a collapsed shed about 100 feet from the water's edge. We ignored it and set up near a small break in the reeds. The sun started to go down around 6:30, and we hadn't caught anything. Caleb decided to go explore while I stayed by the water. About 20 minutes later, I realized I hadn't heard him call back, and the woods were completely silent. I figured I'd check around the shed, since that was the only place to really explore out here. When I got to the shed, I didn't see Caleb, but I noticed something weird. There were these small animal bones scattered around the base of it. Dozens of them. Rabbit skulls, rib cages, tiny jaws. I called his name again and waited, but the only sound I heard was the water rippling a few feet behind me. I turned, and Caleb was standing by the water, completely still. I don't know how he got there without me hearing. I walked over and asked him where he went, but he wouldn't look at me. His eyes were wide, and he just said, "It's not deep." I didn't understand what he meant, and when I asked again, he just shook his head and started walking toward the woods. He wouldn't say another word until we got back to the car. Later that night, I called him to ask what happened. He said he didn't remember anything after reaching the shed. But the next morning, I got a text from him with a picture. It was of the lake from above, like a drone photo, with a black shape just under the water, long and serpentine, coiled near the bank. Caleb swore he didn't take the photo. I asked him to come by and talk about it, but he never showed. And a few days later, his phone was disconnected.
Back when I worked overnights at a small motel off the highway, we had this regular guest named Terry. Middle-aged guy, always paid cash, always stayed in room 104. Nothing about him really stood out. Quiet, polite, kept to himself. He came once every month, stayed for exactly 2 nights, then left before sunrise on the 3rd day. One night during a dead shift in November, I was flipping through the logs and noticed something weird. Terry had checked in once a month for the past 3 years, always the exact same days of the month. But the strange part was that every single time someone else had reported seeing shadows or hearing whispers from outside their rooms, and it was always guests in the room next to his. I mentioned it to my manager the next day. She brushed it off. "People say weird stuff all the time," she told me. That night, I decided to do something stupid. I put myself in the room next to Terry's. I marked myself down as occupied under a fake name, then stayed there after my shift ended at midnight. I left the light off and kept the blinds shut. The wall between our rooms was thin enough that I could hear his TV playing something. It sounded like static, but there were no actual channels that played that. Around 2 a.m., I heard footsteps right outside my door, then a knock. I didn't answer. After a minute, the knock came again. 3 times, slow, deliberate. Then silence. I stayed up the rest of the night, heart pounding. At 6 a.m., I looked outside. Terry's truck was gone. When I told my manager I wanted to quit, she looked at me for a long time, then nodded. She didn't ask why. A week later, I drove past the motel and saw that room 104 had the curtains torn halfway down. No lights inside. The door was cracked open.
There's a tunnel system beneath my college campus that most students don't know about. Old maintenance corridors that were used back when the school had its own heating plant. My friend Laura found an entrance once behind one of the older buildings and convinced me to go exploring with her one night. We brought flashlights, snacks, even music, like we were treating it like a weird kind of urban camping trip. The entrance was tucked behind a rusted door that didn't lock anymore. It led into a narrow stairwell that went straight down for what felt like forever. Once we were underground, the temperature dropped fast. The walls were stone, wet with condensation. Pipes ran along the ceilings, some still dripping. We walked for maybe 20 minutes, turning randomly, joking about getting lost. Then we stopped joking. At some point, we came across a side hall where the floor had this substance on it, like dried mud, but darker. It looked like handprints had been dragged through it, long, streaky smears in parallel, like someone crawling and clawing backward. Lara went quiet. I whispered that we should turn back. She nodded. But when we turned around, the hallway behind us wasn't the same. The pipes were different, more corroded. The ceiling was lower. There was this deep hum in the distance, almost like a chant vibrating through the floor. I told her we must have taken a wrong turn, but we hadn't. I was sure of it. We started walking fast, retracing our steps. My flashlight flickered. At one point, we passed a junction and heard something behind us. It was a thud, dull, deliberate, metal on stone. We didn't look back. We just ran. We found the stairwell again eventually, except the door at the top was shut, and it wasn't the same door we came through. It was newer, with a security pad. It opened anyway. We emerged into a different building, one neither of us recognized. We left campus that night and never talked about it again. But here's the worst part. A month later, Lara went missing. Her roommate said she'd gone for a walk after dark. The police found her phone on a stairwell landing inside the old heating plant. That part of campus has been sealed off since 1982.
Some doors never close all the way. Some places don't like being remembered. If any of tonight's stories reminded you of something you've experienced, drop it in the comments. You're not alone. Not really. And if you made it this far, thank you. You just listened to 5 real horror stories, and maybe, you'll sleep okay tonight. But if your phone rings with your own number, don't answer. This was Scary Stories Alive. See you next time.